Okay. Good morning, everyone. I thought of recording an early morning episode. I feel I realized something that I felt it was noteworthy to create an episode for. Pretty much I was looking at the idea of, how would I say it? I was wondering about consciousness. And then I realized, to some degree, consciousness, its mystery is limited to what is apparent or what in some sense appears. But then for the first time, I started to think about consciousness as if, what if consciousness is a style? What if there's a style to consciousness? We, for example, look at human beings, different human beings in history, and some human beings had a very unique style. I mean, everybody has their own unique style, but technically it's not activated. Or in the outer realms, kind of inner realm naturalness is unauthorized sometimes. But anyways, pretty much this idea that there's a style to consciousness, and I'm going to explain in this episode how really consciousness is space. And hopefully it will be worth your while, dear listeners. I'll begin by first bringing this notepad thing I have. So I would like everybody to look at the screen. And people are going to be like, Mr. Within, you want us to look at the screen of consciousness? And no, just the video screen. That's it. Okay. So, So first I would say, let me open up the sentence, the statement, and here, the style of consciousness. So I would say that there's four components to this episode. And so I guess I'll start here by saying the concept of style. There we go. So, I guess on some level, I've mapped my way forward into this episode. Is there a style to consciousness? How is consciousness space? What context does the concept of style apply to? So, I guess, for me, personally, I would say the biggest sector of my conscious life experience so far where I have experienced style was that, in some sense, it was through speech, one of my, how would I say it? Pretty much before like these Mr.Within talks, I remember that on this YouTube channel that you see right now, I had uploaded like Alan Watts and Terence McKenna videos. And I remember listening to both Alan Watts and Terence McKenna and suddenly feeling like I'm seeing something I've never seen before, and each of these two gentlemen, Alan Wilson Watts and Terence McKenna, it was as if I got to see, the style of the universe behind the eyes of these two individuals when they spoke. So I would say when it comes to style, I feel I'm a bit of a minimalist when it comes to, for example, fashion. But when it comes to writing or the style of even, let's say, geometry and design, right? For me, that's really where I've understood style. And I could tell you that what in the writing universe they call the writer's voice. Everybody has their own writer's voice. If you just write long enough and authentically enough, wherever you are, you'll suddenly discover your writer's voice. So, I guess a way I can explain, for example, style, I can put it in contrast to something. And let's say, for example, we have, so I gave you the example in writing, there's a writer's voice, that's really a person's true style. Their writer's voice is the style of their inner ones. Here's let's say another example. I'll go to the fashion example, right? So we have clothing, right? And so if the idea of fashion, for example, or the style, or whether it's a verb. Okay, here, I got it. Perfect. So pretty much we have the concept of style here. And I would say the style can come to a noun, or it can come to a verb. Okay? Now, for example, someone wearing, let's say, fashion. How would I say this? Let's say fashion is what the cultural program tells the individual. Fashion is how, for example, clothing is being worn based on outside reasons, right? So let's say somebody, I don't know, reads a magazine and then suddenly like goes and, buys the clothing in that magazine, okay? That would be fashion, as if the idea for that clothing came from outside of the person, right? But now imagine you're someone who, for example, I don't know, you like wearing a watch, or you like wearing wristbands, or you like wearing rings. And so the idea is that style is coming from within, fashion is coming from without. Okay, so I would say contrast. So we have style, and then we have, let's say, fashion. Okay, and in other words, fashion is outer influenced and style is inner influenced. For example, I'll tell you this. Something I knew from just listening to Terence McKenna and Alan Watts early on. I would say those two are, again, like my, their minds were like great friends of my mind. That's how I treated their mind, I would say Terence McKenna and Alan Watts, they were, their voices helped me, see a new dimensions to religion. And so I realized from them that pretty much everybody has their own style. And the cool thing about our DNA, and the cool thing about our memory, and the cool thing about our, let's say, epigenetical conditioning, the human being, its style is on some level how it holds itself behind its eyes, and with what level, or here's the thing, style can be said to be how the inner realms are moving the outer realms, and fashion could be how outer realms are moving the inner realms. Now, for example, for clothing, that's obvious. For speech, it would be as if somebody just like reading something off a piece of paper, right? Like somebody robotically just monotone talking, and then somebody talking as if the words mean something to the core of their brain, because really, it's hilarious. Human beings don't want to spend, don't want to waste time, right? If you look at a lot of human behavior in 2022, everybody, doesn't have enough time, but in and what I'm trying to say here is that pretty much it's like two video games that are being played at the same time. Okay, imagine two video games overlaid, two types of games, or let's say two films overlaid upon each other. Video game is a good analogy, though, I'll go with that. So imagine two video games overlaid, and now based on how much your inner life moves, your inner realms, if your inner realms move, if reality moves faster behind your eyes than in front of your eyes, that's where style comes from, I find. Right? Because style is a sort of certainty and then an allowance from that state of certainty for there to appear, right? And the biggest thing about style, I'll tell you, there's the Zen story. There's the Zen story where pretty much this, I don't know, Zen practitioner is just, this guy is just meditating in this grassland, in this blissful kind of very, you know, good place to meditate, and he suddenly realizes the truth about nature. And as the story goes, it's a Japanese story, Japanese Zen story, and pretty much there's a sort of demon or some entity, you know, in another dimension, and this demon sees that this human being suddenly realizes something about the truth of reality. The demon runs and goes and tells the demon lord, you know, the Dark Lord, and says, Dark Lord, this human being has just realized something about the true nature of things. What do we do? And then the Dark Lord says, don't worry about it, because the human being will make a belief out of its finding, right? It's as if what I'm trying to say here is that pretty much it's how much of life is being accepted based on an outer analysis, and how much of it is in some sense a sort of purely inner motivation, right? I have noticed that when I do things for the first time ever, right, whether it's talking about something for the first time anew or in some sense any activity, I realize that I am left to discovering my own style. Pretty much anybody who challenges themselves or anybody who trains, you eventually catch a rhythm, you know. You know, pretty much life is this event that's happening, and this event has two dimensions where it's being influenced from. And when the human being forgets its true nature, its it's the nature of its mind gets defined by its outer realms, right? To be honest, right now, you know, I think like a lot of people are saying they're spiritual, you know. But I would think like maybe 70% of those people who say they are spiritual, they're actually still in the level of like mind, you know. People think that I don't know how to say it, but I guess like what I'm trying to get to is like, okay, we have the idea, let me start from there. We have the idea of clothing, okay? So clothing, there's a style and there's a fashion. Somebody who, let's say, dresses like everybody else, that's fashion. Somebody who, let's say, you know, you're someone who went to a Led Zeppelin concert and you just, you know, I don't know, you wear Led Zeppelin t-shirts or something, right? Or you dress like a rock star, even though the rock stars of 2022 are like electronic DJs, EDM. But what I'm trying to say is that style is arising from the personal dimensions, and I find that it comes from what the human being holds as to be the most valuable, right? That means, for example, let's say you're someone, and based on, let's say you go into a culture, let's say you were raised in a religious culture, and you go into a culture that's not religious, you go into a secular culture, and in that secular culture, right, you try to fit in and try to be secular and all that, but then you suddenly realize that, like, the memories of your childhood were occurring in a religious context. Do you see? And so imagine it's like our behavior shows, like, another way of saying what style is how your eyes have learned from the world so far, or how much your eyes have noticed, pretty much how much a human being has noticed its true nature. Pretty much, I'm like, okay, my intelligence has been capable to see style and a fashion to like clothing. It's been able to see a style and fashion to, or in writing it would be maybe etiquette, but like, sort of style and fashion to, for example, speech, communication. And now it's like the only thing left to consider is that what if there is a style and fashion to consciousness, and what if in some sense how we are associating as, let's say, an individual objective entity. That means I'm saying like okay, here. So we have a human being, right? And so let's say we have style of okay, here, let me simplify this. Style equals inner motivation, or inner motivated. Fashion equals outer motivated. So now we want to wonder about the style, I would say, of consciousness. And this equals what internally motivates consciousness. And then we have a fashion of consciousness, and we say, okay, what externally motivates consciousness. So if we wonder about here, I gotta go to a new page. The internal motivation. of consciousness and here I'll put external motivation. So I guess here the external motivation for consciousness is ecosystem, and culture is another way of saying culture is an ecosystem of culture is how the behaviors of human beings in nature is a sort of ecosystem. So culture is a behavioral ecosystem. I should probably give a tag on this. Culture is a behavioral and anytime, guys, something relates to behavior, it has to do with time. You see, it's technically impossible to be anything in a changing world without a consideration of what I call reference points. Now, reference points, in this odd book I wrote, the first book I wrote, called The Great Work. And honestly, it was a book that wrote itself. Like, it was one of those automated books, you know. Here, I'll go back to this. So external motivations, we have ecosystem, we have culture, we have language, we have memory, and we have macrocosm, which is pretty much the greater ecosystem. So it's just external factors, right? Pretty much I'm saying, like, the external motivation of consciousness being the fashion of consciousness, the fashion of consciousness being in some sense how the ego is, how light enters the eyes, poetically reflects off the brain into a subjectivity where we become a character in a story, right? And so it's the strange thing where the external motivation of consciousness is to translate light. We are light translators, really. Like, that's, the brain is translating light into a story, is translating an object into a subject. Like, the mysteries of what's going on with the human being is so much bigger than just, you know, a sort of abstract philosophical contentment, you know. There's an honor to life in changing with the world, you know. And when one changes with the world, imagine for a very long time, you eventually reach a point where you're changing as the world. And you know, this sort of idea of style, guys, it's pretty much like, let me give you guys an example of my own writing style, right? I was in my youth, I didn't, like, I mean, at the age of 11, I liked writing on my own. I didn't like writing in school, right? But I had like good cursive. I mean, this is like a digital notepad I'm using right now. But there was a time where my handwriting could have impressed the mythological gods. Anyways, let me not, fly a different direction too soon. So we have the external motivation of consciousness. It's pretty much what we find in front of our eyes. The internal motivation of consciousness, what we find behind our eyes, I would say, we find memory. We find imagination. We find unknown inner witness. Ignore this box at the bottom of the page, guys. That's how I just make notes for the title episodes. For the titles of the episodes. Anyways, so the style of consciousness is its inner motivation. Its inner motivation is what we have access to. And really what we have access to before we compartmentalize it as memory or imagination is in some sense pretty much, how would I say it, like our biological eyes need light to see, but when a person closes their eyes, like wherever you are right now, listening to me, close your eyes and envision, like remember what you ate yesterday, or remember something you did yesterday. And your eyes are closed in the moment and you're remembering something. And now, if I was to ask you, behind your eyes, isn't it the case that you have access to sight without needing light? Do you know that's kind of like what the memory is? Do you know? It's like the light imprinted itself somewhere where the pattern still exists. Memory, pretty much the inner realms, is like, think of it this way, there's a known world and there's an unknown world. In the known world there's a known self which is interacting with the known world, and now imagine simultaneously there's an unknown self interacting with an unknown world. Now I don't know how to say it, but it's like time and space are tools and methods for the known self. The moment the human being realizes that what human consciousness is being is an event that cannot be defined, because it's a sort of creator state event. You know, it's this hilarious thing where the body was never alive, the mind, endlessly resets, and the soul was never here. Like, that's the hilarity of this world we find ourselves in. To say consciousness is space, I gotta get to that too. Okay, so I think these would be the factors for the inner motivations of consciousness. So the fashion of consciousness is how we have a periodic table-based appearance. Right now, my existence is dressed in the periodic table. I would say my mind, in order for me to be an individual, to even speak to you, is dressed in language right now. Right now, as I'm speaking to you, I'm like a being that is inside like a linguistic Iron Man suit. Because individual consciousness cannot exist without the notion of a collectivity. When the notion of the collectivity was there, the same moment individuality was, then it becomes a situation where it has never been one side of the coin. It's as if the world is neither good, neither evil, so we need to find a new word to call it, We need to evolve beyond duality. Subjectively, objectively, it's impossible because we need, the light and darkness of the sun, right? Guys, right now I'm on my balcony and the weather's getting cold, and I'm feeling like, should I, just for survival reasons, for warmth, just sit cross-legged like I'm contemplating. Oh man, this episode is actually, I think, one of the most important things. I could say that consciousness is space, and how the concept of style may be something that is going to evolve our understanding. It's going to vitiate our academic departments, global academic departments. Can you imagine professors being, no way, consciousness has style? The style of consciousness would be another way of saying, how does the experiential, how is existence being experienced from the beginning of conceivable manifestation? It's as if the biological creature is not designed to be like an information storehouse. The best approach is really then to see it as an antenna. I think the concept that the brain is an antenna is like, the spirituality of, the secular. It's the transcendental gateway of the secular mind. What I mean by that is that, see, an object and subject are simultaneously being present, and then we're saying we know something is being something. But the moment we take the object-subject relationship, and so in some sense wonder, okay, we have an object that's being a subject. Now, what if the subject was like an object and it had a subject of its own? Body, fashion of consciousness, it's the appearance of consciousness. Mind is style of consciousness, and I guess another word for style. I don't know why the term's original potential was coming to my mind, but I'm trying to think what other word instead of style of consciousness. Here, it's the essence. We pretty much have an essence of consciousness. So, I think many people are familiar with the word esoteric, but they also need to be familiar with the concept of the exoteric. And I think the person who came up with both of these words was named Eric. You know? You know, I'm pretty sure one of the smart people who, designed, the English language was named Eric, Of course, I mean, language's origin, language's origin comes from behavior. There's a behavioral language to the world, and the more the world gets, vacuumed into, let's say, a technological cube, it will realize, that every dimension to our life is a world of ability, a world of potential. You see, a style is something where the person would say, a good question maybe to ask is like, hey, Mr. Within, does style depend on ego? The mind is the depths of consciousness. The body is, in some sense, the surface of consciousness. It's another way of saying that rather than human beings acting like they know what they are, they should begin to consider what if we are what we see in this earthly plane, or whatever this room called Earth, or this place called Earth. In some sense, it is the surface. That means we are technically on the surface of the inner Earth. As much as we're on the surface of the outer Earth, sure, we don't know what's going on at the center of the planet, but like, imagine if like like this whole time on Earth, we were like, where are the aliens, guys? Where are the aliens? And then we realize the center of a planet is like, there's an interstellar civilization inside it or something. We're like, no way, Earth is a space station this whole time. It's a space station. We're on the outside, and it's just filled with like rock. I'll be right back, guys. Okay. So back to it. Let's see. Esoteric. I guess what I'm trying to say, like seriously, where this could lead. I guess so far I've explained that the outer realms, what we find in front of our eyes, is in some sense the surface of consciousness and its appearance and fashion. What is behind our eyes is the depths of consciousness. And it's the style and essence. And so it's this idea of, it's pretty much the free will's originality. Now, originality is going to be a very hard word to say because on some level the past is being recycled through culture. Human beings are maybe like the only species on this planet that it like cares about its past. That gets offended by its past. No other animal on this planet is using time to re-simulate the world into subjectivity, and then it's as if we're linking an object and a subject. A subject is ultimately an image, and an object is you can say a material image. And so it's as if an inner shape and an outer shape get linked, right? And then that's where the meaning of words come from. There's a quote from Ramana Maharshi. Ramana Maharshi says the ultimate truth is so simple. It is nothing more than being in one's original state. One's original state. This is when one, how would I say it? It's as if one's earliest emotions. The human being has an ability to, let's not say for now, transcend dimensions, like, multiple dimensions, but the human being has transcended somehow in the human intelligence. We have transcended objecthood into subjecthood. Now the transcendence beyond subjecthood goes back to that whole original state idea. That means imagine this world, like imagine, I don't know, let's say 400, 600 years from now, or imagine a parallel universe of Earth where cyberspace became so fascinating for human beings that it's as if the world, the original Earth was lost. Like where I'm giving you this talk to you right now, imagine in the future children are being born in cyberspace realities thinking that's the original Earth, you know. For example, when I was a kid, I would watch this show Pokemon, and that's really what it is, you know. It's a cyberspace reality. So Ash in Pokemon is trapped inside the simulation. I think every person has to go towards a sort of reset point. And you know, it's very hard to say. It's very hard to say if the purpose of the human being is to analyze everything till the end of time, or if it's just our purpose is to be. Imagine this whole time we should be living like how the birds and squirrels are living, just fine, just be a part of our natural ecosystem. But it's as if human beings and their vision has been so grand that it's as if instead of us listening to nature, mankind is telling nature what to do or what it is, right? Rather than, for example, looking in the eyes of an animal and seeing it's a living being, you know, mankind just revalued the animal. It's like, all right, object, food, you know, I'm hungry, food, you know. It's like a hungry man has, you know, very strong, limited logic. Consciousness, they can't explain it right now. Nobody can. It's like trying to explain, you know, it's trying to see the one that's seeing, right? It's like as bizarre as this. It's trying to, it's like how Alan Watts would say there's the Zen koan. It's like trying to bite your own teeth. It's an impossible act, and so the way human beings have organized themselves on this rock, it used to be multidimensional, kind of the inner realms had held priority. Now we've reached a point in history where the outer realms are holding priority, and ultimately dimensions must be used. That means it's like when a person wonders, why am I in a world? Why am I being, you know, a 4.5 billion-year-old evolutionary kind of a geometry continuum? You know? Because what is the DNA? It's shape. Everything is shape. Everything's made of shapes. Everything that we can see or consider, it has to have a shape. So that shape separates it from the world, you know. That means it's hilarious. It's as if like in order for there to be a self in a world, the world had to overcome itself, you know. it's like consciousness is defining everything, and then from those definitions we want to know, like, how consciousness can be defined. It's as if language is in a lesser dimension than the capability of the human mind, right? The coolest thing I would say about the human experience, or being a human being, is that it's like you're in the middle of a portal. We're standing in the middle of a portal. Or imagine somebody who hasn't made up its mind. It's as if imagine an entity that hasn't made up its mind, whether it's a subject or an object. And so it's as if somebody who can't decide which side of the portal they want to go on, so they just run to the one side, then run to the other side, run to just like an endless loop. I have realized that all creatures, whether they know it or not, seek novelty more than people want their desires. An argument can be made that if you showed someone something they had never seen before, that was not even conceivable to the premise of their desire, right, they would still desire it, right? Because we want novelty. And novelty cannot arise without freedom. And freedom cannot arise as long as there's animals biting each other, right? So it's as if we have to push violence into cyberspace, or parents need to raise the children of the future generations with a sense, like, realize how important it is that we have become civilized creatures on this rock in the middle of nowhere, right? The fact that I'm like sitting, on a balcony, being able to speak to a global audience, right, just from my home, is like, and there's not all-out war, and it's like kingdoms are not trying to conquer, and civilizations from its savageness, it has come to some sort of a development of law. Some people, they think breaking laws is like freedom. It's like, no, man, it's like laws took a while it took a while for the human brain to be able to acknowledge something more than just savage desire. You know what it is? It's hilarious, but you know how, for example, a pet owner trains like their pet? For some reason, I feel the planet and the universal laws of nature have trained us, have trained the human being. It's as if, like, the earth, pretty much, you can hilariously say, it takes the earth, it took the earth 4.5 billion years. To get to this. And there's so many mysteries to nature. That means even if, like, a person considers outer world mystery, for what that means is either transcendental, or it could mean beyond the horizon, right? And then inner world mystery. Inner world is like there's divinity in the microcosm as much as there is in the macrocosm. I feel the final insight for just temporary consciousness is to recognize how it knows it's being temporary is sourced out of an awareness that is not the content in it. So, back to the first page. The style of consciousness, is there a style to consciousness? Yes, there is a sort of unknown inner motivation to how intelligence is happening, and when one trusts their mind, that's when your style, you can have style. It's like when a person doesn't trust the moment, they're being defined by the outside of it, It's like this. It's like when a person doesn't trust themselves, the karma of the moment kind of, divides the burden into the, let's say, in that, for the sector. It's kind of like this, where the thing about karma is that it's as if you get what you deserve, but what you deserve is based on the effort you put. Right? It's as if right now, regardless of our personality, names, and biology, there's an intelligence being here. There's like some sort of unknown, like mysterious energy we're calling like free the self, right? The species had the audacity to name energy. Believe that. Through the decency of how nature has prepared, pretty much, it's as if all beings in consciousness, whatever format, right? Fiction, non-fiction, whatever kind of creature of consciousness or moment where there's consciousness and awareness of duality, one must learn to, in some sense, spin with the wheel of karma in such a way where they have become the center of the wheel that never moves. You see, that's how it is. The style of the mind is different. If you're a cultural entity, the style of your mind is some known archetype. But if you become a mystic, you begin to realize that the common, let's say, the pattern that we see is that most people, it's not that they don't have access to the unknown, or they don't see the unknown, but when they see the unknown, they avoid it, right? Because there's this view that anything a person fears, they stop looking at, they stop trying to understand, anything that they fear. It's as if fear is like trapping a being inside an emotion, Now to this idea of consciousness. Consciousness is space. So, consciousness results to the interaction of subjects and objects. Consciousness is how an object is being the subject and how a subject is being an object. There's a paradoxical, symmetrical nature to it. I don't know how else to explain this. But anyways, consciousness is space. Consciousness results to the interaction of subjects and objects. And what that means is as if we don't just have consciousness, we have really consciousness is conditional to the human, right? So technically there isn't just consciousness, there is human consciousness. There could be consciousness, like let's say robotic consciousness, all of that, but I'm trying to say when it comes to the human experience, it's like the human consciousness holds within it these two terms, two dimensions, right? It's as if we're saying like the human side of consciousness. There's like a human filter over the light of consciousness. It's like the light of consciousness is moving through a lens, which is the, the geometry of the human animal. Or as, you can shorten that for humanimal. It's like we're not animals, we're humanimals. So human consciousness, right, either becomes like mind, equals housing for subjects. So the human being is pretty much like a shift between these, a sort of rhythmic entity between being a body and mind at the same time. I feel when we inhale and oxygen goes to the brain, that's when we're being actually a mind, and when we exhale, we kind of come to the silence of the body. It's where like we're jumping up and down, like a dolphin jumps up and down from water. Human beings jump up and down between body and mind, and therefore language and storytelling, character customization, and ideological destinies come into the picture. Language is honestly the closest thing to the Matrix movie. It's honestly like a Matrix, right? And it's literally code. That means imagine an extraterrestrial civilization had this, let's say, the invisible eyes in the sky had a sort of technology that they could, in some sense, just like the movie Matrix, see codes on a screen. They could see codes to every human being, right? And that code would just be self-narration, which is going on 24/7. And let me tell you why somebody important who said this quote, where he said, thinking is the mind talking to itself. I don't know who said it, but that's the quote. Thinking is the mind talking to itself. And it's not actually the mind talking to itself, it's the mind recreating itself while simultaneously being the self, being others, and being the world. You see, the brain can't tell the difference. This might be too fixed of a statement, but I'll say, it's as if in the inner realms, there's in front of your eyes, in the outer realms, you are being a biological self. You see the biological self of others, and you see like the physical world, right? So the a biological self of others is separate from, it's like organisms are separate from each other, and they're also separate from the world they're organized in, right? Right? But in the inner realms, the brain is tasked with not only copy pasting the whole world, not copy pasting others which become part of the whole world, but also copy pasting the self. The brain is, I feel, taking the shortcut, right? So behind our eyes, the brain is being the whole world, then free will cherry picks out, selfhood, People don't understand the value of philosophy, guys. Philosophy has the power of, allowing any human being who's late to question the meaning of time. So I guess what I'm trying to get to with all this is that if consciousness results to the interaction of subjects and objects, then the next question comes, what does an objective and subjective universe have in common? So guys, this is something where I think this is the way I'm going to share it, I feel maybe new. But what does an object and subjective universe have in common? Guys, maybe I'll retitle this episode "The Proof That Consciousness is Space." I think this is very important. So, I'll go over this again. Pretty much we're wondering how is consciousness space. Then we're saying, okay, consciousness results through subjects and objects interacting, right? It's an interaction of an objective and subjective kind. Now we ask this question, what does an objective and subjective universe have in common? Which comes down to what is the common denominator between objects and subjects. I think I'll dedicate an episode to this, but it's going to be revealed or shared. If consciousness constitutes subjects and objects, It's like saying consciousness has an ability to move as an object in an objective universe, and it has an ability to move as a subject in a subjective universe. What does the objective and subjective universe have in common? And guys, I've balanced my notepad on the edge of my chair, so excuse the handwriting. So, pretty much, the conclusion I've reached is that the common denominator between the inner realms and outer realms is that they are both happening in space. They are both content that is somewhere. So the somewhere, the space is the common denominator. So if consciousness can behave like a mind, it can behave like a body. The mind is in a space occurring and the body is occurring in space, so technically space. And then we have the mind and we have the body. This is a model, guys. That means you can see the body, mind, and soul like it's concentric circles, but this is how I'm showing it. So, this is in some sense saying objects and subjects. So we had one line, if consciousness constitutes subjects and objects, then we need to find their common denominator. If the common denominator Last line, if consciousness is alive, then space is alive. So this would mean that mind equals how space experiences shape. Consciousness is here to acknowledge the geometry of the realm, the geometry of its fragmented senses of self, and eventually realize that the geometry of greater dimensions is inconceivable. You know, being a human being and a conscious human being is like sitting on the bench, you know, and then there's this like finals game happening, you know. Our species is the way our species is behaving, we are not the only ones here. There's something else here. I mean, of course, there's the whole religious and, you know, past spiritual connotations to it, but I feel what is here is that for the first time, man, prior to making contact to extraterrestrials, is wondering if he can make contact with space. Imagine the first human being who didn't contact aliens, contact the life of space. You know? Space is inconceivable. The concept of emptiness is inconceivable. The concept of death for a living being is inconceivable. That means the experience of it is inconceivable. It's hilarious. It's pretty much like the destiny of our outer realms. The destiny of our outer realms is to, in some sense, go to the inner realms, and the destiny of our inner realms is to go into the outer realms. It's as if like it would be this bizarre way if you were a Buddhist, considering that, let's say, in your next reincarnation, your body, it's as if like you reincarnated. Let's say you were reincarnated as a body, how do I say it? Okay, let me say it like this. In the Bhagavad Gita, I just remembered, there's a passage that says Krishna is telling Arjuna, God, the avatar of God is telling Arjuna, this archer, in the middle of the battlefield, that for many, many lifetimes, he has, in some sense, as if God and Arjuna have taken turns, you know, as if God has been with Arjuna, you know, it's as if the truth is familiar to the soul, right, but to the mind, it cannot be, because the mind needs novelty to manifest, to know it's alive, and for the body is just there for the ride, you know. The body's like, all right, whatever the soul and mind decide, I'll do that, yeah. And the mind's like, all right, body, you know, I'll decide for you. But soul, what do you think, you know? And the soul is like the silence and the potential of life. When they say, you know, like there's a spirit to something, whether it's the movement of people, you know, whether it's in some sense an individual, whether it's like a robot having a spirit or whatever. It's just the notion that the first person unknown mover, as it is viewing existence, it is simultaneously being it. The brain is not seeing light, the brain is being the light. In the Gnostic tradition, they have this idea that, of course, it's from a divine angle, from a divine context, but they had this view that every person has the light of truth inside them, and the task in the lifetime or the great work was to release this light, right? It's as if there's it's another poetic way of saying unleash your potential before the curtains are pulled, or in some sense those who move towards the great performance, right? That's how I feel, honestly. I feel like, all creatures in a karmic realm are just performing, and they're being watched, and in some sense it's a sort of, audition, right? This earth. It's like an audition of who's understood what's going on. And if it's conditionally attached, then it's as if life isn't an object, if life isn't a subject, what can life be? And this is when the idea of life dissolves, the known idea of life dissolves into the unknown direct experience of life. The purpose of consciousness. Pretty much I'm saying with what I've written down here is that the purpose of the body. So I've written the purpose of consciousness in the inner realms equals accept original nature equals realize what you're being. The purpose of consciousness in the outer realms equals explore infinite worlds equals realize what you're doing. In the outer realms, matter doesn't have a purpose unless individualized consciousness touches it or attention, blesses the periodic table into, identity. Consciousness is like saying you have access to dimensions, right? And behind our eyes, I feel that really what the greatest thing that we can find behind our eyes is how it's all being here. In front of our eyes, it is pretty much, the inventor's alley, Or imagine they made this next level sky city in the future where it was just like inventors' city. A city of inventors. Now, if, let me go back to this, if consciousness is space, it would be another way of saying then illusion. Illusion or simulation is inside truth. Is truth content oriented? everybody starts off from a presence of attention. If they have a patient approach, they will eventually notice that the biological body has rhythms. So it's as if like breathing is being automated. Let's say the heart is beating, a lot of the body is being automated. And if the person trusts that they can be that moment, that automation pretty much in a fractal way goes to everything else. You know, on some level, the human position is so mysterious and vast that it's like it's impossible to talk about it and figure it out. That means there can never be a written proof for consciousness. However, I find that we have to wonder honestly what we have access to, what the species has access to, and what we don't have access to. It's like the ego is playing a game of access. And I guess I would say that maybe the greatest teaching as the dimensions of life take shape and classification, as sorry guys, my attention's drifting a little. I mean, what can I say? Consciousness is what we see, but it's also the sum total of our senses within a moment of awareness. If we identify with matter, it's as if we're going to see objects. Objects are going to be the source of meaning. If the attention is on subjects, stories and language and sort of ideological ethos becomes the mover of the moment. And it's kind of like when you're being what you are, you don't need to be anything else. would a true being have a concept of truth? You know, from the destiny of an object, from the destiny of a character and story, a subject, we are reaching a point where it's as if this intelligence within, let's say this intelligence that we're all being, it's as if it's trying to see all the ways it can be, and then it's realizing that being is being prior for it to do anything to be. In the outer realms, we have to do before we can be in a state of being. But in the inner realms, you can be. It's like you're being before. It's as if nobody needs to try to be a mind, you know. A person can watch the mind as their whole moment, but they, in some sense, it's like, why aren't human beings doubting that they're being their biological body? Because it's like they're being it instantly, right? Multidimensional patience is required. Before the truth state can be stabilized. What it is freedom of mind being selflessness, and freedom of body being unlimited mobility and ability. Sometimes I wonder if from René Descartes' mind-body dualism, if the mind was in another dimension beyond the body, a dimension where the body, let's say, couldn't interfere. Or I don't know, just a dimension beyond the body. It's as if when let's say the person transitions from biological physical life, and so they're no longer a biological physical entity. So it would be as if, would the mind still have emotions? You know, and I think the answer is very complex, because in dream states, the body is kind of in unconscious state, but the mind is creating its own universe. It's creating a body for you in the dream state, and it's creating a dream body, dream world, you know, dream scenario. And the body's like, you know, you're sleeping in your bed, and you're in your dream, you're like flying in the clouds or something. If we say consciousness is space, space is alive, and truth is the origin of consciousness, or the presence of space is the presence of truth, if space is alive and space is consciousness, then all that the human archetype, the personality can do is that wherever you are, just trust how you are being the whole moment. Cultivate this. And I feel that whether in the most advanced states of communication or in the most silent moments of communication, which could also be very advanced states of communication, like inner communication. But like what I'm trying to say is, wherever you are, when you wonder about not the freedom of an object, freedom of a subject, but freedom of the whole moment, where all variables are being present in at once. That is our true nature. The original earth is an inconceivable field of being. It's as if energy is alive in a hidden world we can't comprehend as an individual conscious entity. It's as if the entrance to the higher dimension seems to be how truth is being before action, right? The emergence of consciousness, just the fact that in the middle of nowhere, something noticed the nowhere, right? Something is now here. Like, aside from the geometry being incredible, it's like I feel we're all here for a sort of energetic activation. That means not only a person's, existence is enough, but it's as if we are here to orchestrate. You know what it is? It would be as if Earth could poetically also be seen as like this great orchestra, the advanced civilization, and different musicians from different sectors of fathomable reality have arrived here to contribute to the development of the most advanced vision. The guidance of the most advanced vision from the religious view in regards to the inner realms is the submission of the idea of self. So it's another way of saying, letting the world be in the driver's seat rather than the self. Study the secret source of your attention. Wonder about the unknown roots of the tree of knowledge. For truth awaits before time could get there. The attention that is being alive is the divinity in the room. God is a metaphor for an inconceivable origin. And the way the thoughts come and go and the motivations, this style of how consciousness, animates. There's an incredible ability here on this planet that needs to be activated and actualized. It's as if global genius, global capability is shy. You know, it's as if we are experiencing the caterpillar still being inside the cocoon of civilization. It's as if the civilization is slowly going into a metamorphosis. The metamorphosis of subjects that are moving objects into whole moments of awareness, the presence of the whole moment of awareness in which the body and mind are moving fluidly. Perhaps the only definition for freedom could be that it's origin. Freedom equals origin. Whether truth is being or truth is a being. To ride the rhythms of one's life force. To journey, I mean technically we're all destined towards a journey to the edge of our eyes. Fascinated by the beyond, even freedom involved. Sincerity, naturalness, authenticity, benevolence. The style of consciousness is how space is allowing the manifestation to become meaning. So there is a style to how everybody is just an unknown viewer before they make a decision. At the moment they make a decision, they animate. The subjective simulation applies to that. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening. I hope this episode was helpful. Much blessings. And whoever does anything, practices anything, for example, you do 10,000 hours of something, you get to see all the dimensions of it, And so imagine we were wondering about, the style of the future generations being one that is not afraid of the unknown, but smart enough to see how it can readjust its role when it needs to. The world has always been waiting for itself. Much blessings and honestly.